Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with Superlative Podcast. Be sure to listen to the other aBlogtoWatch podcast called aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we chat about the latest news. Today on Superlative, my guest is Dr. Sébastien Chaulmontet. Sébastien, welcome again.
Yeah, thanks, Ariel, for having me again, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, this particular show, Superlative, has been going on long enough that I can have people back on for second and third times, and they barely remember the first interview because it was years ago now.
Yeah.
We're in the hundreds of episodes already, but that's okay because every single day there seems to be multiple new watches, right?
Yeah, and different stuff to discuss, I guess.
And you're responsible for a lot of these new watches.
Yeah, quite a few. Yeah, and especially over the years, they adds up somehow.
I was just looking at some of the stuff from Arnold and Son, where a lot of your, I think, most important work actually happened. And I don't think they've moved on past you.
Well, it's not up to me to say that, but I'm glad to see that products we developed with a lot of love and care at the time are still actually produced. And let's say that most of the movements are quite familiar to me still today. But I'm happy. It proves that we did, I hope, a good job at the time, and which creates a few things which are maybe getting classics at some points. And so movement-wise, I think I still recognize my babies, and but they also did like very nice refinement design-wise. But the movement, I would say, stayed the same. But they did a great job by revising new dials, making also smaller, thinner cases probably. So I think it's pretty well done what they're doing right now. But yeah, I'm happy to see that the thing we constructed over the years are still there, and that the DNA is still used. So I'm happy to see that.
Now, I'm glad you have a good attitude about it. And I have to say, I can't relate emotionally because I've never been in your shoes. And I'm curious, what is it like when you see or hear news about it? Is it like hearing about a child or like an ex-girlfriend? Like, I'm wondering emotionally, because there's a definite connection. There always will be, especially when it's your architecture they're still working on. You no longer work there. You're not being paid by it, right? Like nothing actually benefits you anymore. Just help me understand what the emotional state is like.
Yeah, it's a very good question, actually. Yeah, it is 7 years ago, so it's easier now, and I'm in contact with the people doing it, and we discuss openly what they're doing. And I also had lunch with their CEO, which now changed, Savary, which is a very great guy, and I think he did a great job at the company. So we had lunch from time to time to discuss both Angelus and Angelus and Arnold and Son. And I have a great contact with the actual team, and I think they do a good job. At the beginning, obviously, it was more difficult, obviously, because it was quite an emotional undertaking on my side.
Yeah.
I mean, we relaunched it from the ground, so we did everything from the strategy to it's not like I just being an employee, I was a shareholder as well. And especially Angelus, which is a brand I'm still collecting intensively and I have a very, very deep relation to. It was even more difficult, I would say, than Arnold. While Arnold, the technical side, used a lot of my patents. So it's probably from the technical side of things, even more personal than Angelus. But Angelus, it's a brand I still will be one of my great loves of watchmaking. There are two brands I have always loved is GLC, Jaeger-LeCoultre, and Angelus. So I never worked for GLC, but I was able to revive Angelus, which was on the verge of getting fully forgotten. And we had the chance at the time to buy the brand, not to redeposit, but to be the real legal owner of the historical brand and to relaunch it.
So you got to do this interesting thing, and I'm glad you brought up Angelus, where you were a fan of the brand, still are a fan of the historic brand, collector, and had the opportunity, I think we talked about this last time, but it's a story that is, merits repeating. You acquired the rights and you revived the brand. You didn't make copies of the old watches. You made brand new watches, but you had this interesting exercise in taking this old name that you loved and making something new, imagining what they might make today. The Angelus watches are kind of weird and amazing in a lot of really, really cool ways. And I think that was, of course, a precursor to what you've now done at Albishorn. In the meantime, of course, you've acquired an excellent managerial position at Solida, the movement maker. But now with Albishorn, and we're going to spend most of the conversation talking about it, you're inventing something. So Angelus was a real brand revival. Of course, you had to invent new products. You've now, as an artist, as an intellectual, gone even further now. You've now entered what I call the Hollywood of horology.
No, but you really got it on point. I mean, Albishorn is a bit the end of a kind of sorts. I started with Angelus. You know what's problematic was I got a lot of critics. I was quite criticized when we did Angelus because other collectors like myself actually were expecting to see revivals and everything. And I always try to remember, why did I love Angelus in the first place? Is because I did so many world first. The first chronograph with date in series. You had a perpetual before from Patek, but nothing in larger quantities. They did the Tinkler, the first automatic repeater watch, like crazy stuff you would have expected from Patek Philippe, from Vacheron Constantin, and actually it was Angelus. So for me, it was always a bit tricky to repeat the past. As much as I love it, as much as I own, I love collecting and owning these watches, I didn't see myself doing a Chronodato, for instance, or not at least a one-to-one copy. And I said, These guys have always been on the verge of modernity, so why should we take it and not be faithful to it? Obviously, as you probably also remember, the criticism was pretty harsh at the time, especially coming from my side of the game, like people like me criticizing. It's always like you have collectors who say, who is the idiot running this thing? And you are a collector as well. And it's not that I have no understanding for Angelus. I wrote the history of it. It's not that, but again, I didn't see myself repeating it.
They didn't understand intellectually. And this is common.
Yeah.
You're too smart for most of them. I'm not trying to put them down, but but you know what I mean?
No, but they have the right to be disappointed. I mean, if you go to the cinema and to the movie and you expect a great and you come off something weird you were not. Look, if the product needs to be explained, it's probably a failure. That's something I had to realize. I always try to explain the U10 when people get a bit shocked by the squarish thing, and I realized
the shaving razor. It's
the brown design. If you have to explain it, you probably already failed. And the good thing with Albishorn in that respect is, as a brand, is fully new, and I fully recognize I have no tradition, no past. I hopefully a future, but at least no past. It's very great because I have no heritage to take care of. So I would say the entire watchmaking heritage is mine. I can play with every kind of code. And yes, Albishorn is really in a given fact of wanting to do something vintage, because you can also decide to do contemporary watchmaking, which I love a lot as well. But in the given thing, we said we will do vintage, to say yes, but let's imagine stuff which has not been done and can be interesting for collectors as well, in the sense of they don't own it. And for me, it was very important to create a watch I want to wear basically first myself, and something I would be sure not to find on any Sunday flea market, but something which I would have loved people to do, and it could have been done actually technically or aesthetically, but just they forgot to do. So I kind of like the fact of adding, paintings to a famous painter, and also for me, obviously the work is much more difficult because you have to be creative, so it takes a much longer time probably to have a product which is pleasing to the eye. I saw it. I thought I would be quicker on everything. It took me 4 years. Because as you don't copy something, you make mistakes. You have to restart. You have to do prototypes, and I fully understand why it's so tempting for big brands to just re-edit stuff from the museum. Because sometimes you copy something great, but you don't even understand why it's so great. But it's happened to be there. You just make it. And if you try to just play with the codes, you really have to understand the way they designed at the time, what was important to them. So it's a much longer process, I would say, than just taking something and just saying it's great. And we can all agree there are so many great designs, and just to make it one-to-one. And then having a success. So if you decide not to copy anything, and the temptation to copy is always pretty, because you love watches, and at some point you almost want to do the same, and then you say no. I really tried myself to even if I recognized in the watches I designed the references. When we take the maxi graphs, there are a few references, but still, I would say when you look at it, it's something you had the impression you a bit know, but you would never say it's a copy of something. And so
there's
yes,
so much to unpack. Yeah, go ahead.
No, so you're right. It's very well said actually, and you analyze it is very on point. Albishorn is probably the result of my thoughts I had at the time with Angelus, and I never actually was in a position to make it happen at Angelus. It was in the making, having also a historical part of the brand, but an imaginary somehow, like a new collection, which would have been more in line, probably aesthetically, what people were expecting us to do, but would not be like a one-to-one reproduction of any existing product.
Let's unpack a lot of that. First of all, thank you. There's so much things in there. We could have hours of conversation about this. I'm just trying to figure out what to pick out. Let's stay at Angelus for a moment before we move on to Albishorn, because I think there's a very interesting thing there. You acquire this brand, you have basically this choice. And the choice is sort of this double-edged sword because you're hurt either way. On the one hand, you want to respect the expectations of the brand. You want to expect there's people out there that have this idea around it. But if you make the old watch, it's this cheap replica, everyone can kind of do that. It's not interesting. And so what you try to do as an artist, you're truly acting as an artist here, not as an engineer, but as a creative. You said, if Angelus existed today and they went in the same direction, what is something they would have made? Or what is something they may have made back then? You started to be creative. You started to ask, what if? And the reaction was that some people understood you, but most, because they don't share your imagination, were like, what is this? What are you doing? And so you just basically were just trying to be original. You wanted to be a good artist. And then you recognized the folly of doing this. It's difficult to make people happy and it takes time for them to understand. So now, to not repeat this trap, if you will, you just said, I want to still imagine things that may have existed, but in order to not be shackled by expectation, I must get rid of all expectation. And to get rid of expectation, I must invent everything. I must invent a clean slate. I must create familiarity where there is some, such as the theme of the watch, right? Such as the category, the sport, whatever. And we'll go into more of that. But I just want them to be thinking of a time period. And then I want them to allow me as a performer to present them with an idea. What if this thing existed in this time period? And you being as knowledgeable as you are, you wanted to make sure that it actually looks as though it could have been from that time period. I'm thinking about the Hamilton watch that was in the latest Indiana Jones movie that actually had a quartz movement in it, even though it was supposed to be from the 1940s. Like, you would never allow that, right? That is not something that you would allow happen. So you used all of your knowledge and education and geekery, if you will, around watches to make sure that all the details are right. But there's such a small number of people out there that can understand all these many layers and immediately be impressed with what you did. It could take years for people to unravel this. Again, this is sort of like onion of complexity.
Yeah, it's thanks. I mean, it's I take it as a compliment. Yeah, I mean, it's exactly, the thought I had. And my thought about Albishorn is pretty simple, actually, in the sense of, first of all, I realized over the years that I am really a nerd and that sometimes techniques alone is not what impresses people. So also with Albishorn, I really try, first of all, to make good-looking watches. And what is very interesting, I mean, it sounds logical, right? Everybody would tell you he tries to do good-looking watches. I mean, it would be suicidal not to do so. But what I like with what I'm happy for the time being with Albishorn, that I got positive feedbacks just on the aesthetics from people not into technique, not into, I got, emails from people seeing in the newspapers and say, oh, I love regatta themes, I love that. And we're not at all actually into watches, and just found it a beautiful thing.
Congrats.
And that's I'm happy. I'm really happy about that as well. I still couldn't resist to pack some little patterns in and technique inside with my retrograde 10-minute counter. Yeah, the nerdy aspect to it is obviously present, but I would say I learned over the year to probably focus more on size and aesthetics. For instance, I think the Arnold and Son we did at the time were really beautiful watches, but they were thick and they were big. It was also quite accepted 10 years ago, but nowadays I would say I have a lot of ideas I would never bring to fruition just because it's too fat, too large, too whatever. So like an Albishorn, no, it's 39 millimeters. When it's hand-wound, it's 12 in height. For chrono, it's really acceptable. Automatic, it's 13. So I'm roughly 2 millimeters less than I would say the average automatic chronograph. So I would say I also learned a lot over the years of what I want to do. And that sometimes, even if I have a great idea of a complication, if it adds too much height, nowadays I will probably drop it. And maybe 10 years ago, I would have done it. And nowadays, it's getting even more complex because I have to filter all my technical digital displays kind of chronograph I want to make one day into will it still be good looking on the wrist? And the different layers, as you said, of the historical aspect of it, of having written so many things about chronographs, having looked at so many, that but at the end of the day, I think if the product by itself stands by itself and without the need of explanation too much, you just look at it, you like it or don't, but hopefully you do like it, then I think it's a success. I also really learned, as I told just with the U10 from Angelus, that if you need to explain that there is a bit of ditarams and that you wanted to do a travel clock, that you wanted to have a deadbeat second because it mimicked the technology who killed, it's fun if you already like it and someone have a story to tell, so you realize that everything has some kind of meaning. But if the guy said, "What's this ugly piece?" and say, "Yeah, but it's still an homage to Dieter Rams," and say, "Yeah, but it's still plain ugly," So and also Albishorn is also the good thing about Albishorn is that it's very small, in the sense of I don't have to make anyone happy other than myself, in the sense of I have no shareholders, no people who lend me money who want a return on investment. So it's probably the first time in my life where I feel really free to make the watch I want to wear, and I have the hope that I will find for roughly every model 100 people in the world who share the same vision and who wants or buy it at some point. So, the entire Albishorn thing is built on a very small personal scale around myself and a little team, especially Fabien Colliou, which is a great designer I'm working with also at Angelus and Arnold. So we are both close friends and have been working together for 13 years. But we basically, when we discuss watches, for me, it's really important to make very small series. And I don't try to please the masses. And I have no pressure in the sense of I don't have to have a certain return on investment. I don't need to make volumes that the thing can fly. So it's also a new sensation I never had. Obviously, as you can imagine, with La Joux-Perret and Arnold & Son, there were quite some money. And also we had to perform quite quickly. Angelus was a bit of the same kind of stuff, which was good as well because we had a lot of means I probably don't have nowadays. Well, not probably, I don't have, but I have the liberty, and that's almost, I would say, priceless. So I don't have to convince anyone that an imaginary regatta from 1939 might be interesting. So as long as I have the hope that I will convince at least 100 people for every model I will make in the future that there is some charm and uniqueness to it, and to sell these. So it's why also I feel comfortable with Albishorn, in the sense of I have not targets which seems to me totally out of reach. And I don't have to make a three-hand automatic with date, which everybody asks me to do because it would be logical. I don't do these kind of stuff. So I'm happy to do hand-wound chronographs with bizarre layouts, something we can maybe come back to, because I had a lot of thoughts going on why should chronographs always be bicompacts? There are so many funky layouts possible. But that's a topic. That's a topic for it. I think we started with a maxigraph in a very funny setup with retrograde and a disc for the seconds. Something not seen before. One might not like it, but at least it can claim to be original. So the good thing about Albishorn is probably really the result of all the things I experienced with the previous brands I was running, and trying to make it personal on a very personal scale.
It sounds like you have a retirement brand, but I actually don't think this is going to be the last brand you ever do. I believe there's more beyond this, but it's nice to see that you don't have that type of pressure, because that, you talk about it almost in passing, but that's a big deal, because this allows you to be the artist. It allows you to be creative, to have less, you have some commercial pressure, but to have less commercial pressure. And you're a well-connected guy, Sébastien. You work at a movement maker. You have all the suppliers at your fingertips. You can do this, as you know, in a way that other people can't.
Yeah, obviously, yes.
So this is incredible for you. I want to go back to something you said before with a simple question. What is more difficult for you, to design a complicated watch or a pretty watch?
Oh, by far a pretty watch. Yeah.
Why would you say that is?
Yeah, because complication, you have a given space, you have a 3D, you know a bit the available techniques, so you have always a bit of problem. Making something very complicated in a small space is very difficult, but it's also more a question of discipline. You know the techniques available. From time to time, you have to invent something, or you find, because you have a constraint, you find something you can have a pattern on. The pattern is more a result. It's not an aim by itself. It's you have a problem, you solve it, and then you realize that you solve it in an original way. And most of the time, you realize you'd solve it in a way someone solved it before. But from time to time, you manage to find something new. But complicated, you can always. But the thing is, I think what makes watchmaking so interesting is the balance between technique and aesthetics. That's what makes watchmaking so, and probably never really art, in the sense it has always a purpose of giving time. And this constraint of being more or less shock resistant, water resistant, and giving time is a huge constraint. And if you add a chrono on it, you have a lot more, because you have pushers and you have adding height. So height is never helpful to be good looking. So I would say it's very difficult to make good looking chronographs. It's probably easier to make good looking three hands, in the sense of you can be thin, you can be minimalistic, you can do like a no logo, no index kind of dial. It's already artistic somehow. But when you go chronograph, you need to respect what you are doing. So you need to make a tool, something you can read the time, something where you can read the chrono. So you have a lot of scales to deal with, a lot of different typographies to combine, and colors. And then it gets really tricky to make a good looking watch, I would say. It's why you have so many classics. No, not so many. It's why some amazing good designs are still so, like a Speedmaster, Navitimer, are still so popular today. Because if you look closely, they're very hard to beat. Tell me to design a better Speedmaster, I think I will sweat for hours, because it's probably, if I would be able to, probably it would already exist, in the sense of it's not that easy.
That makes sense. I appreciate the answer. I think that because our brains know beauty but don't know how to design beauty, we have to discover it rather than imagine it. So we have to make something and we're like, oh, that actually is beautiful. You can imagine a technical solution to something and then, model it out and it works. Very few people can imagine something beautiful. They see it or feel it and they know it's beautiful, and it requires constant experimentation.
Exactly.
And that's a difficult thing to do, especially when these things actually have to be modeled out and made. A small 1 millimeter difference here or there can make the difference between ugly or not ugly, which is a huge thing. Something which has defined a lot of what you do is originality. And I call this, and I really think of this as being part of the artist mentality, that when you care deeply about a pursuit and aesthetic, you don't want to copy something else. You want to respect it. You want to acknowledge it. Maybe you want to build on it, but you don't want to copy something else. And I hear you oftentimes explicitly say, I didn't want to copy something or something like that. My question is, and now that you're becoming a little bit more commercially minded, how much does the market care? I know that you and the other intellectuals care. I care. But how much does the market care, in your opinion, about copying? Do they value originality as much as...
No,
as we do?
They actually don't, and I cannot blame anyone for that, because I would say, as a consumer myself, if I would not be like, look, the problem is when you do watches every day, you are very focused on what you do, and you get like a super expert. But most people have more interesting things to do than to care about watches, and I would say that the good re-edition is most of the time more than sufficient. That definitively is. And I will not blame anyone for that, because honestly, the same is true for me when I go into other fields, probably cars, or maybe clothes or other stuff. I would say, give me classics. It's all good. I don't need someone to reinvent the wheel. I think it's something I do really for myself, in a sense of, as I own a lot of these originals, being a collector myself, I don't want to reproduce something I could buy. I like to talk about Longines, which is a brand I adore. I wrote a lot about Longines. I own some Longines, even if most of them nowadays are unobtainable. In chronograph, you're on the 150K for something very special. But I would never ever buy a re-edition of anything. And I still think Longines is nowadays one of the greatest brands, probably the best value proposition out there. But personally, I would not buy a re-edition. That's because I will always want to have a real, the original Lindbergh watch. I would always want to have a chronograph with a 13ZN, the original manufacture movement made by Longines, which is probably the best movement chronograph ever, if we have to decide on one single wristwatch movement. Because, pocket watches, you have crazy stuff, much more crazy. But in wristwatches, you can go to Datograph from Lange. There's a lot of good chronograph movements. But the 13ZN, I think, is a myth. But my point is, I would say if I would have to run Longines, I would do the same they are doing. But as I am not Longines and I don't have their problems of making big volumes and making everybody happy, I can really take care of the niche of the niche. I really see myself as a niche in the niche, you know. So what I want to say is because of my perspective, I do things differently, but I have no critical, it's not a criticism towards people doing it differently, because in their shoes, I would probably do exactly the same.
Now, you mentioned something interesting. You said you wouldn't buy a re-edition. And I guess my first question is, how do you define what a re-edition is exactly?
Yeah, it's not that an easy one. It's a good question, Ariel, a very good one. For instance, I have different reversals, which I would not consider re-editions, modern ones I'm talking, which you would probably say it's exactly as much a re-edition than the Legion Diver from Longines. I see it a bit differently. It's more of a classic. They stopped producing it as they restarted in the 80s because of the Italian market, or at least it's a story which is we get told all quite often.
They always blame the Italian market, don't they?
Yeah, they blame that they found some old cases and they wanted them to put them together. I don't know what's true or not, but for me, that's a good question. There's probably a thin line between a pure re-edition and a model which is a classic and has been produced continuously. But I agree with you that I would not be really able to really give a clear What are you trying to avoid? You know, when you say, because first of all, there's a lot of lay consumers that listen to the show, and if you say like something bad, like, oh, Sébastien, he's a respectable guy, like maybe I should listen to him. Like, I actually also think that that's not true for every type of collector. You're someone that has a lot of the originals. So maybe explain what you as the collector are trying to avoid. When you say I don't want to get a re-edition, what is it that you don't like to get? I think if I should make a different, give a definition. For me, if you take a Speedmaster, for instance, is not a re-edition, and the movement of the product nowadays is at least as good, if not better, than it ever was, you know?
Yeah.
So I would say a Speedmaster, or if you take the Reverso, I have old ones, which I have even are radioactive, so it's not the most pleasant thing to wear. And you look at the modern ones are superior in every respect, from the case finishing to the movement inside to precision. So the problem, I think, what I have with re-editions, I would say it's when they mimic in a way, but they don't have the quality of the original. So if you take a great design from the past and you don't have a great movement inside, and the watch gets thicker, gets bigger, it's chunky, you have no reasons to buy the re-edition. I think what disturbs with 80 or 90% of re-edition nowadays, that they try to mimic in a clumsy way, adding height, adding everything. They don't have the finesse, they don't have this refinement you find on the original. And I would say that's probably what disturbs me. It mimics something fantastic from the past, but it doesn't have the mechanical or logical content or the charm it had. I would say nowadays, every collector, if you are presented with something which is perfectly true to the original, like a perfect recreation of an Aston Martin DB5 with the same Connelly leather, the same smell, the same chrome, the same everything, they would still buy it. Especially if it would be done by Aston Martin itself and not some kind of third-party car maker. But I think my main problem with most of these re-edition is that the technical content is not on par, and we are obliged to we make bigger watches nowadays because the expectations of wearers nowadays are not the same in the 40s, 50s, where people were taking care of their watches, taking it off when they washed their hands, and they were accepting even that they were not dust proof. Imagine telling someone nowadays his watch is not dust proof. The guy didn't even know that something cannot be dust proof, but that's the truth. An old chronograph is not dust proof. So when you open it after 2 or 3 years, you have little hairs inside. It's horrible. Gosh. Because of the pushers, they have so much play. You can almost, when you push a bit the pusher, you can see inside the movement. So it's crazy. Honestly, when I open my old chronographs, I have the impression I collected it's crazy. It's a vacuum cleaner, actually.
What do you think is responsible for this obsession we have with the past? I see people try to make modern or futuristic watches. It's so difficult. I guess they succeed when it comes to maybe an electronic device or something like that. But there's something about mechanical watches where they don't want to seem to advance past the 1990s in terms of style. It's just, we're sort of stuck there. We have this sort of 100-year period and we're just playing within it and that's it. First to talk on a very personal base, I haven't given up on contemporary watchmaking. I'm working with a close friend over the last 8 years on our own very contemporary movement in a very contemporary minimalistic case, cool. which we hope to launch next year. So it's a very, very high technical endeavor in the sense of very complex movement, but it would be very minimalistic. So everything but vintage. So I would say I haven't given up in trying to make modern watches. So people will be shocked seeing both the Albishorn and the other thing and saying, is it the same guy who does these? Yes, it is the same guy. But to come back to your question, I think it's pretty much related to the technology we are in. So in my very contemporary project, I also have I would say novel technical mechanical solutions. So it was kind of an R&D at night project we had. So it was very R&D movement focused, and Albishorn is very design focused. And as we are playing within a technology which is a dead technology, we have been killed several times. We have been killed by the quartz. Then I thought we couldn't die a second time. I was wrong because we see it in the sales figures that obviously connected watches even hurts mechanical one, not only the entry price quartz ones, but also the mechanical ones. As you see, something you are very aware of, probably one of the most people I know who study so carefully the industry and the evolution. Ariel, the loss of volume, as you know, it's a catastrophe for our industry. So I would say as we play with the dead technology, it always also sometimes seems a bit weird when you package something technology very old into a very contemporary carbon kind of looking thing. But when you strip it down, you still have a very ancient technology used to it. So I sometimes call it techno shit because it just only looks like technological. But when you put things apart, you say, oh my goodness, that's my old radio, my old stuff, and you just package it in something. So I would say that a lot of the so-called modernity in mechanical watchmaking come from pure design cues. But when you strip down the thing, we are still based in a technology which is 100 years old. To if we are nice, and 250 if we are nasty. So you can repackage stuff, but it doesn't change the DNA of it. So I would say a lot of these modern designs, which I actually also like, it's not a question of, but when you it's not because you make a bridge black and you skeletonize it a bit and you said that it reminds you of something technological. The base movement doesn't change in its core. You still use rubies where they used to have rubies. You still have an hairspring from Huygens. You still have a balance wheel. You can make it in blue if it makes you happy. It's still a balance wheel. Though as the technology itself is very nostalgic and I love that aspect of it.
that it is a nostalgic. Well, it also suits a nostalgic design, I would say.
Thank you. That's a good response. So going back to Albishorn, there's a period of 42 years, which you designate as sort of being the thematic beginning and end of how you've planned out the brand so far. I'm looking at the timeline page on the website.
Yeah.
And this is quite interesting. This is actually, I guess, the best hint as to sort of what you're going to do. But you sort of have this timeline, 1927, first solo nonstop flight across the Atlantic, and you have some stuff. And then 1939, the Maxograph, which is the first model, hypothetical regatta chronograph designed for a participant in the first Bol d'Or, the legendary regatta on Lake Geneva. And then you go down, there's a little information about it. And then there's more. There's 1948, apparently is going to be another imaginary product that's going to come out, the Type 10 prototype, which is supposed to be imaginary order from the French Air Force. 1950, another one. We go back to 1958 more. And then all the way to 1965, where you imagine you're basically your Speedmaster, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And this is amazing here. This is a roadmap for,
it is a roadmap,
I guess, the next several years of the brand, right? That's right. It's already there on the website.
Yeah, and the things already exist, actually, in the sense of most of them have been prototyped.
Already?
Yeah, because I like to test my stuff quite some while before I go public. So all the watches you have on the site, which are listed here, exist physically. And there will be more in between which are designed but not made.
Oh yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah. Because how did it start with Albishorn? I was with a friend. He asked me basically the same question: What is so wrong with re-edition? Everybody's happy, and I was telling him 10 years ago, you will see this fashion will fade, and he said you were so wrong, and I had to agree on that because re-editions have been, some of them, they have to really dig deep in the museum to find new things to make re-edition of, because we have seen so many re-editions over the years. And he said, but what is wrong about that? And I said, look, for me, we should be creative, even if we do vintage. It's how the imaginary thing started, actually. And then I thought to myself, the thing is fun, but will it be a one-trick pony? Or will it be something I could play, not forever, but for a long, long period? And then it's why I designed all the ones. I said, as a collector, I love the Type 20, French Army. It's an epitome of chronographs.
Beautiful.
It is. It has an ancestor. Most people don't like to talk about it. It's a German military chronograph, but it has no ancestor within the army in France. And there exist Type 10s, but it's a dashboard. And then I say, it would be great as a collector, like on a flea market on a Sunday, because as you know, the Type 10 was done in Switzerland. Mate Tissot produced for Breguet, for instance, and you had Erin, you had Auricos. You had a lot of people producing the Type 20, sorry. And I always said, imagine me going on a Sunday morning on the flea market and finding watchmakers who tried to submit something to the French a few years earlier called the Type 10. And it's how I spin the story. I even went so far that you will see when we launch a watch, we did the technical sheet from the French Army. The one they did for the Type 20, we rewrote it at the Type 10 with all the specs of ours. Obviously, it's it's fun because what is the point of doing a Type 20? Everybody, you have so many legit brands doing it. The first of all being Breguet, which is an incredible watchmaker. It was more fun to me, and instead of trying to figure out how to make it look different. So we have a bit of a different layout as well, more like a dashboard with a little patented indication. So in a given scope, to try to be original and to bring something fresh, but still recognizable as being a pilot chronograph. But if you look closer, you would see a lot of little stuff which makes it a bit different and who could justify it being the ancestor. So
in the literary sense, I think we call this historical fiction, right? Something that could have existed, didn't, but could have, doesn't violate what we know about history and the laws of physics. And in the product sense, I think a good term is, I think they call found history. The idea that this is meant to look as though you discovered it. It never really existed, but it takes everything you know, and you, in an ideal sense, you wish you would have found this. This is the watch that you wish you would have found. And this is this is a very challenging thing to do. You need to have lived and breathed this hobby for a long, long time.
Yeah, which is what you do. Yeah.
But I think you're so humble about that, because here's the funny thing about your website, and a lot of people may miss this if they're not looking at a lot of different watch websites. You go to the Albishorn-watches.ch, and the first thing you see is imaginary vintage, which you trademarked apparently, right?
Yeah, I did it.
And then you have this little this text description which tries to explain what the brand is. Now, here's what's interesting. There's a lot of other brands out there that essentially have these, we'll call them fake vintage. They look older watches with a website that tries to have the same scenery and things like that. But none of them do what you do in actually calling out the fact that it's fantasy. It's all pretend, make-believe. And that's a lot of the brands today, actually. You took this additional step because you're an honest person in this community to basically announce that it's imaginary, tell everyone that you're having fun, that's for play, yet you're in a market with dozens of other brands that do all the same thing, but do not disclose that it's invented. Do you agree?
Yeah, no, I would say, it's not a question of disclosure. First of all, I think I have a bit of a different approach.
I'm complimenting you. It's good.
Because the thing is, I think I go further in the sense of, I would say because most people who don't have the heritage, so they have nothing to copy. So we have the same problem. Probably we don't have anything to copy, but I would say most of them, they don't give that much of attention. They basically do like kind of a best of very famous models, where it's not that difficult to say what they wanted to copy somehow. So they are still trying to be original because they don't want to be the one copy which also exists, but they just
you are the Stanley Kubrick of it. Don't get me wrong. You are looking at all the details.
No,
but the consumer doesn't know the difference a lot of the time.
No, probably it doesn't. I would say the people probably who would be interested in Albishorn is there will be it will be a very, very small portion, obviously, of watch buyers who sees a difference. And also the fact that, for instance, I give you a good thing. What makes, for instance, Albishorn different, I would say, from all its competitors. Most of the people, when I show them the Maxigraph, they say, "What, did you just do a fucking proper big bicompacts like everyone?" It's exactly the point. I did everything not to have a bicompacts. My main goal was to not offer a fucking bicompact. Sorry to be that rude, but the thing is, obviously, most people would say the bicompact is so pleasing to the eye. Everybody does it, from the Daytona to the Navitimer to the Speedmaster and everyone. So obviously, I didn't want to do that. So I want to say, I try to make non-lazy imaginary. I don't try to make just the best of watches which are bestsellers. I really try to make really imaginary with a story, with a for instance, when people do vintage which didn't exist, they take really watches that somehow existed. They do a diver, they do a driver chronograph. I mean, they didn't exist any regatta from the 40s before the Maxigraph, which actually was done this year, so it's not really from the 40s, but it pretends to be. But my point is, I really figure out stuff which didn't exist. The idea of the Maxigraph is very simple. It was, the boat who won in 1939 was owned by a very rich and famous Geneva guy who ordered the best boat in Sweden from Holm. It's a boat maker. I'm not a specialist, but he had this crazy boat on the lake. Obviously, he won the thing. And he won several because he always had the best boat and the guy seemed to know what he was doing. And imagine, you are very wealthy. You have the best boat in the world. So basically, you have the Formula One of the lake in 1939. Then you look a bit in the newspaper and you see that Longines does crazy watches for aviation. They have the Lindbergh. And you say, my goodness, I need exactly that, but for the sea. So you knock at the door of maybe Patek Philippe, Vacheron, whomever, and say, guys, can't you do that? And the reason why it didn't exist at the time is because regatta was something really for the elite. I would say even sailing today is maybe not open to everyone, but in the 30s, you had to be an aristocrat or whatsoever, the King of England, to have a boat just for regatta purposes, or to be a Genevan billionaire. So imagine this guy having all the means in the world. I mean, they say, my goodness, I need a tool. When I'm on my super boat, I want a super watch. And they go to one of the Geneva watchmakers and say, everything is available, waterproofness, your chronograph with different displays. I want something specifically made for the sea. And that's what makes my brand so different from others. They would not go and doing a niche product and having this historical approach. I think they have more. I think I'm wrong. Have an aesthetical approach. They say this is selling well in these brands, and so they do a diver, a driver, and all these kind. And I love these watches. It's not, but I try to add a layer to address to a niche within the niche of people who already have all these drivers, all these divers, and they want categories and stories which didn't exist. And it's probably also the reason why, especially the Maxigraph looks so different, because there is no equivalent in another brand where I could have copied it. In the sense of, as there is no historical model of it, you cannot actually copy it as it's not existing. So I got what you said, that other brands could say, actually, we also do imaginary, and Chaulmontet is quite clever the way he says that to us, in the sense of it sounds even probably better, but I would still say that the entire product try to be more imaginative than just making a best of the designs you liked.
And it is, and I think that's the beauty, is that, someone like myself, I remember when you showed this to me, months ago, and you just within a few seconds told me the concept. I instantly understood how challenging it is, and that you chose a really interesting project that you thought that only someone like yourself could bring, something fresh to the table. And you succeeded. You made an imaginary product that's original, but that looks like it can sort of exist within the pantheon of these great timepieces. Now, the amount of people out there that commercially understand this is limited.
Yeah, it is.
So then the question is how mass market can you make this concept, or can you, as you said, convince 100 people for each one of these things? And you probably can. The choice of price, I think, is also very, very important. I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about pricing in general in the market. $5,000 is where this watch is at, which is, I think, an interesting price point today. You've made watches at many price points, including much higher. You could have gone much more high end. Maybe you could have gone more low end. I guess my question is, in all the research you did and all the thoughts you did, how did your heart and mind come to this price point to begin with?
Yeah, the price point is always, first of all, the price point in this particular case is a result of what I put into the watch in terms of technique, of quality, of case, of hands. So I have never done watches in that price point before, in the sense of watches I designed were much higher, much higher. By far. The most affordable Arnold at the time was 10K. And it doesn't exist anymore. We went up market because there was a three-hand, and nobody was expecting a three-hand from us, like a simple three-hand HMS at the time. That's a very, very, very good question, Ariel, and it's probably the most complex of the entire thing. Is I did all the movement modification, all the stuff I wanted, all the quality I wanted on the case. I have polishing on all edges. I have very expensive dies, expensive hands, and when you add all up, you arrived in the price range. I would say I always thinking Swiss franc, but I should think dollar. Let's say $4,000 to $5,500, depending on complexity and everything. So I wanted to have a product without any shortcuts. And I didn't see myself, trying to cut costs on quality or visuals or whatsoever to get to a price point. So I am obviously more expensive than most of the brands you were referring to who do imaginary or do vintage without calling it what it is. But they all try to be very competitive, I say price-wise, and they are aiming to big volumes. And I am under price-wise way below Swiss traditional watchmakers, quality watchmakers like Omega or Breitling or Rolex, obviously. That's for sure. So I am a bit in between. I am targeting to make very small volumes, which obviously has also an impact on price. Most, if not all, next models will be chronometer certified with quite refined movement, withholding little complications and stuff I did myself. So you end up at the 5K quite naturally. It's not a question of huge margin. I had a comment on one of the posts that you wanted to buy. It's a steep price. You always have, what is this? What does a steep price mean? you can always do things cheaper, but at some point people notice, and the audience I'm talking to is quite sensitive to the price, not to the price, to the finishing, to the quality of blue hands, of having super complex dials. When you look at the case finishing, it's a crazy case finishing for the level, for the price I am in with my case of chamfering, polishing, and the different surfaces. I have a very complex buckle, little details. But again, I would say for 99% of the people out there, a cheap-made re-edition of something, mass-produced, will make them happy. And at the end of the day, it's all what counts. What counts is that you wear something which makes you feel happy and comfortable. So I am very, very aware of the fact that my product and the story around it, the price point it has, the technical content will not appeal to the broader audience. It's also why I'm not feeling very insecure that someone will say, oh, he found an amazing new venture. I did not. I do watches I want to wear myself, and I hope some other will join on the journey. But it's not like I wake up one morning and say, guys, imaginary vintage, it's the next big thing. I will produce 10,000 watches. Look, the best scenario for Albishorn is 200 watches a year. So I think if you say to anyone who want to invest into watchmaking, I have a great business opportunity. We will do 200 watches for 5K. I'm not talking about watches for 100K a year. People will look at you and say, that's not a business. That's a hobby. And it is a hobby.
It is a hobby, of course.
But I try to make it very professional, as you see, with all the technical and all the, so that people deserve for that price point to have a perfect service and a very high quality product. But
well, speaking of professional, one of the things that I've noticed is it's an interesting trend. People in your position who could do more with their work, such as launch a brand, sometimes do so, but thinking they'll keep it as a side thing. And then they quickly realize that, wait a minute, the side thing requires a lot of time, and then it sort of consumes their life. And I've seen this happen time and time again, where people think like, I'm just going to have this little side brand. It's going to be easy. And then all of a sudden it's consuming all their time. They have to hire people and they're like, oh my God. And they can't stop because people keep demanding things. And you don't know, what do you do? Do you make more watches? Do you find more distributors? Do you develop new products? Do you go visit your suppliers? Do you go make marketing materials? Like, what do you do today? I have no idea. Are you seeing any of that yet? Because correct me if I'm wrong, most of your ventures have been in teams, at Le Jeu Perret and Arnold and Angelus, of course, is Solida. Doing something on your own is not totally new to you, but this seems to be a slightly new venture. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it is. No, honestly, I would if I would have been aware at the beginning what it would represent to be where I am standing now with, I would haven't done it. I have to be honest, because you got enthusiastic about the idea and you want to prove yourself. You can push it through and then I'd even do all the registration, all the patent writing myself. I do even the strap assembly myself, the packaging. So it's a bit too much. I have to agree. So if someone would have showed me the firm before, I probably would have said, okay, let's be in an idea. Well, I'm like someone in general. I like to go to the end of stuff I started. I'm kind of a project guy, but it's very new to me to work alone, more or less. Well, I have Fabien, which is my designer and who supports me also a lot in different other stuff. But at the end of the day, it's my venture. And so the guy who spends the night assembling stuff is me. But I choose it. For the time being, I'm happy with it. But I agree with you. You always underestimate. I'm always making fun of my watchmaker friends. Like, I'm friend with a lot of independents. They always say, I would make it within a month, and usually it takes 6. So we always are wrong and I did the same. I said, that I will do easy and that will be quick and nothing is easy, nothing is quick. I mean, look, I have started this thing 4 years ago. I was supposed to be on the market 2 years ago, and I never was happy with the quality. I always refined. It's also something I had to learn, that you can die in beauty in the sense of just waiting to do stuff. So it took me 2 years longer just to have the product as I wanted it to be. And so, no, you are totally right. It's also why I'm limiting the production, which will probably maybe, I don't know if it will be naturally limited in a sense of no demand, but I can handle up to 200 watches a year, but I don't see myself handling more. And 200 is already a big figure when you do so much yourself.
Where will you develop the discipline to say, I put enough time into this side project, no more? Because at some point, as you said, you want to do 200, no more, but there's always going to be demands on you and things like that. Have you thought about, separating this to make sure that it doesn't consume all of you? Because I think that compartmentalizing this is a healthy element in trying to keep it as one of your hobbies, but not your only hobby.
Yeah. I mean, at some point, it depends how it evolves. No, it just started, and so you don't take decisions like having someone hiring or something. You try as long as you can to deal it yourself. I would see in a few months how things evolve. And how the reaction. I will launch the Type 10, the imaginary ancestor to Type 20 end of October.
Oh, that's fast.
I still have to finish the press release and some pictures and some. The thing is ready. I have all the movement back from COSC, which was also not such a simple thing because the movement is new, so I had to have it authorized by the COSC. But you're fully right. I am in this transitional, but it's very hard for me to see how things will evolve. As you know, the market seems to be quite tough right now. I cannot judge as I have not been active selling watches before. So I will see a bit how it goes over the next 6 months. But you are right. At some point, I will be obliged because I cannot. I'm working every weekend, every night. It's not something which is sustainable over a year, right? For the time being, it's good because also for me, I learned a lot on the way. Doing things yourself again is humbling. And it is. Honestly, it is. It's so easy to just say, but just do that. And when you end up, putting your lip buckles on 100 straps or during a night, you have a different perception of the product you did. And for the time being, there's no one strap where I didn't put personally the buckle on, and it's where I regretted actually selling my watches with 2 straps, because even if you don't sell many, you have many straps to assemble. Honestly, I had to sort recently. Yeah.
Get your Albishorn watches before Sébastien drops dead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. At some point, you can say these were the ones he really assembled himself. No, but you're right. I mean, it took a dimension, which is, it's getting, but for the time being, I can handle it, but I will have to reconsider how to do it. And one show is for sure, I will not drop it because the interest and the reaction have been so good, and I have so much. And for me, I really love my job at Sellita. It's incredible because what we do here is really changing the industry, or at least helping the industry in a very broad way. And I would say what I do with Albishorn is the perfect opposite of my day job. My day job is finding solution industrial for the entire industry because we do no politics, we have no own brands, so we deliver to all. So I have a very, very large view on what's going on and what are the challenges, and from the development perspective, it's crazy what we are allowed to and what we can do. So for me, intellectually, it's a pleasure. And Albishorn is on the absolute opposite in the sense of it's a very personal thing. It's not that I analyze like there's something missing on the market, but any business venture should first be like identifying something missing and then doing it. And Albishorn really didn't start it that way. It started by doing something I want to wear myself and hopefully finding some clients on the way. So it's probably not what you would ever say that should be a business venture. But so for me, having both, being very creative on one side and having the industrial aspect and all the constraint on the other one, I think I need both to be. And it was something I was missing since I left La Joux Perret, because La Joux Perret, we had Arnold, of course, we had Angelus, but when I started, we had no brands. And in the sense of it was complicated enough, but we were supplying like 30 brands with movement, high-end movements, dedicated stuff, a lot of development. I had a huge team of development, and the brands come along the way, bit some naturally, but yeah, we could buy Arnold, so we did. Then we had Angelus, we did as well. But my point is, I had my career was always balanced between developing for others, especially movements with technical solutions and bigger teams, and also designing, drawing, and dreaming. And this dreaming part I was really missing. And from day one, when I started here, Miguel, the owner and CEO of Sellita, was very comprehensive had a good understanding of that. And from day one, it was clear that at some point I would do it. So it was discussed on day one. It took me 7 years, actually, because I've been here for 7 years to make it happen, because I also had to do stuff here, and I have to put my priorities right, and my job as Sellita is clearly my priority. So we had to put in place a lot of things at Sellita, and I think we did. And so somehow it came naturally that I could do a little thing on the side. But I need both aspects of watchmaking.
That's good, and you'll continue to do more. We have time for just one more question that has to do with how you chose to launch the brand. You did it through a collaboration with William Massena's company, Massena Lab, where I guess this is an edition that only they sell. This was an interesting move. I think it was a good move. It shows that you're just sort of not just in it for yourself, and you're understand that you're there to make the watches and someone else is there to maybe sell the watches. Why did you launch with a Massena Lab watch, and what does this say about your future sales and distribution plans for the company?
Yeah, so there are many reasons. I've known William for quite some years now. I showed him the product. He got very enthusiastic about some designs. Some others he liked less. And for me, I'm more of a product guy. I would say I'm not. My experience in marketing and sales are pretty limited somehow. So I think I take the greatest joy designing and making it. And I would say what comes next is less of my cup of tea. I am on a learning curve, I would say. But I'm a product guy, definitively. And William is a product guy as well, but he's especially a sales guy. At least he has a knowledge in sales I don't. So it came up quite naturally. Also, given as the one point you said before about also the available time. And so it was quite of a perfect fit. And he was also very enthusiastic about the entire thing, which is very helpful when you're full of doubts, you draw stuff, and so most people don't really understand why you do it, and he liked it. And so it came quite naturally, and the story around it was quite the watch itself, the maxi-graph, the regatta thing. He is also from Geneva, and so it made all sense, and it was a great help for me. He organized all the launch with his connections and obviously his sales channels. So yes, it's solely sold through him. But the other ones, I will fly on my own, or at least try to. So it was a one-off. It was a one collaboration, but the brand is not based on the concept of having a third-party distribution, nor on just making collabs. So all the watches you have seen on the timeline are supposed to be launched by myself and sold directly through my website.
Good to know. Sébastien, we're out of time. I recommend everyone visit the Albishorn Watches.ch website. That is ALBISHORN-watches.ch. The guest has been Dr. Sébastien. I always like reminding everyone, Chaulmontet. Sébastien, thank you so much.
Thank you. A pleasure.